And as always, we start this podcast on a high note with smiles and laughs, right? If you're not watching on video, Stacy is currently a little bit out of breath from laughing so much, but it's a good thing. It's a good thing. So, welcome to I Heard You When You Said. My name is Justin, known in some parts of the world as Justine or Justino. Yeah, right. You like that shit? Yeah,
It's true.
it could be true. I don't know. I don't speak Spanish.
Not yet. I did
Not
want to
yet.
bring that up on our to-do list of things we need to do.
Things we need to do is me speak. Got it. I'll put it right behind. Dominate the world.
We speak Spanish. We need to speak Spanish. That came across a couple times in the last couple weeks. Carry on with our introduction.
So that is how I'm known across the world. Could be, possibly, maybe in another reality. This is my partner in crime, my person to make the example of every cohort class that we've ever taught so far. And her name is Stacy. In some parts of the world, she goes by Amazing. But in other parts of the world, the nicknames are a little bit different. So, Stacy, what's up?
I was wondering which nicknames you were going to share today. And I'm like, careful.
It's always different.
Always different. So welcome. So things you need to know as you start listening or watching this podcast. If foul language offends you, you should probably skadoosh. We are not doctors or therapists. We don't play one on the internet. And we are two friends who have a business together who really are just sharing our personal experiences and some of our professional experiences. And that's for you to glean off of. But if you are not our client or client yet, these are just guardrails. These aren't specific for you. If you want to be our client, you could, but just know that when you listen, this is broad sweeping information for the masses. Anything we say and use cannot be used against us in any way, shape, or form, but especially in our friendship.
I will say that we do have about 15 years of combined coaching experience, though. So,
that is true.
That counts for a lot, right? You can take what we say and apply it. You should just probably consult with your medical professional before you do it. That's what we're trying to say. That's what we're trying to 100%.
say. 15 years.
Yeah.
Damn. We know a lot of things.
Well, the funny thing is, the more that you know, the more you realize that you don't know, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. Every single day. Every single day. So, speaking of all that we don't know, we decided we were going to do this podcast a little bit differently. And we're doing it with purpose, on purpose. And we're bringing you into the behind the scenes actual conversations that we have as friends who happen to be business owners and all the other names that we have for each other. So it's going to be a little bit more candid. We are, is highly uncomfortable the word we're going to use, but moderately uncomfortable?
I would say more off the cuff.
Off the cuff. So
I don't know necessarily it was going to be uncomfortable. There may be some awkward moments. I doubt it, but it could be awkward for the listeners. I doubt it's awkward for us.
It could be awkward. So this is real, unfiltered, unscripted. You get to really watch us interact, kind of be a little bit voyeuristic and hopefully not a super creepy way of how we just interact with each other. And these are the conversations we have when really nobody else is watching.
Yeah, I think earlier, what did I call it? Couch talk, because we were actually sitting on a couch together when we decided that we wanted to work on going into business together. So we actually wanted to build something together. So, maybe the precursor to all these episodes will be couch talk, whatever the general subject is, right? That way people know, like, hey, this is a friendship conversation, which it always is in some respects, but in this way, it's a little bit more like free flowing and not as scripted.
Yeah, I like that. Until we actually can do it on a couch when we're in the same city.
That'd be cool.
Hey, just waiting for time to catch up. More than 5 minutes, less than 5 months. So where are we taking this today, friend?
I want you to tell me about your yoga client today.
Okay. So on Tuesdays, I have a space blocked out to teach yoga publicly. And I did that on purpose because everything that you and I do is online. And I was like, hey, my friends own this gym. And really, my friend Kat was like, Stacy, will you teach yoga? So I did this just for Kat. 9 a.m. on Tuesdays in her yoga studio and gym. I'm going to do this. Now, the problem is my friend Kat doesn't sleep and has not. And so she is sleeping at 9 a.m. and has one time made it to this yoga class that I scheduled just for her. Not one time. So because I made this commitment, whether people show up or not, I curate that space. So for the last few weeks, there hasn't been anybody there. And truth be told, I don't publicly announce this because since we are moving, I didn't feel right about creating this massive following of Stacy's teaching public yoga again. And then, busting everybody's hearts that, oh, and now you're leaving. So I kind of just like an act of faith. Whoever shows up is supposed to be there. I'm not trying to grow this yoga class, which to be the biggest and all of that. But having done that for most of my early yoga career, I don't want that. I've taught classes with 50 and 60 bodies and they're sweating all over each other. And I'm not opposed to doing it again. I just don't want to do it weekly. So I go to train today and I get stopped and it's like, hey, Stacy, somebody's here for yoga. And in my mind, I went, oh, shit.
Like, damn it. I can't believe somebody would come to a yoga class that I'm trying to teach.
And so I'm like, absolutely. So I switched mentalities so quickly because I went from, hey, let's go lift heavy things to now a posture of service. Like somebody drove here with an expectation to have my expertise of guiding them through a practice. And she's an older woman. She's 71 and wanted to talk to me. Phenomenal woman. And as really gentle stretching, like most of this is just breath work. And the first thing I ask anybody to do, and this is really the hardest thing that I've asked everybody to do, is to soften their jaw when they exhale. Literally the most terrifying thing I ask people to do in any existence of all the actually challenging things I ask people to do. And if you're a client of mine, you literally just said, amen, that is to unclench their teeth and soften their jaw and exhale. And that exhale, people are like, I've held on so tight that exhale is like, holy crap, I'm actually letting go. So this woman, beautiful soul, by the way, I love this woman, is trying so hard to get this right. She's trying so hard to get it right. And I'm like, you can't get it wrong. If you're breathing, you're doing this right. And I'm cueing her to soften her jaw. And she's like, why is this so hard? And she's like, I feel like I've been holding my breath my entire life. And she's 71. And today was the day that she looked at me and took a breath for the first time. I'm going to try not to cry as I tell the story. And went, I feel like I've been holding my breath my entire life. I didn't know feeling this way was possible. We didn't do anything profound. Like these were gentle stretches and breath work. And I kept watching her try so hard to get it right. And this idea that you couldn't get it wrong was so absolutely foreign. And if you've listened to me at all, you know that there had to be some nervous system principle in here. And so talk about survival mechanisms and how it really takes 3 to 5 minutes for the body to, in a static posture, for a body to release any muscle group. The nervous system is terrified that body parts are going to fall off. So it holds on really tight. And so I was just, inviting her to this perspective that your breath actually invites the body to release a little bit more. And that was probably midway through class. And as we were doing this, it was just her and I. So she got a private instruction without any, didn't care about, how long I've been teaching or the fandom of Stacy Hansen. People, truthfully, would be like, oh my gosh, you had a private with Stacy? Oh my gosh, this woman could care less. And I freaking loved it. And she's like, I did feel my body release. And it really got me thinking of why we do what we do. And why it's so important, not just the podcast and not just our coaching and not just the lives that we do or the speaking events that we're doing, really across the world at this point. um, as of in 2 weeks.
That's the plan. Yeah.
That's the plan. That I don't want somebody to wait until they're 71 to go, oh my gosh, I feel like I've been holding my breath my entire life. Now, I'm so excited that like this is like day one for her. And she's like, I could do this in the car. I could do this here. I could do this anywhere. I'm like, you can. Like, and she even said, I don't get mad very often, but I understand now why people say you should take a breath when you're angry. I didn't know that I could feel like this. And as the class went on, it was just her and I really thought about things that tenants, so to speak, that you and I not only teach on, but operate our life out of how quickly we are willing to change direction when the opportunity is presented to us. I was irritated for about 35 seconds that I didn't do what I wanted to do. And then getting this opportunity to really participate in somebody's life with them in this way was really a gift to me that I'm going to see her again in 2 weeks. So she might be my only yoga. I told her we were moving to Texas and she was so sad. She's like, I only get you for 4 months. I'm like, I know that's kind of rude. I'm sorry, but like we can make the most of it while I'm here.
Did you tell her that you work online too? She can have you all the time.
You can have me all the time. You can have me all the time. It was the first time. You're just trying to be a soft sell.
Yeah, you don't want to lay her. You don't want to lay the Stacy on her too much. She might run away.
Okay, well, there was too many coincidences, and I don't believe in coincidence.
Right.
But she actually grew up in the same part of the San Fernando Valley that I did.
Yeah.
And her mom still lives there. So her mom and my grandma are within blocks of each other. And so she was like, oh, yes, off Winnetka. And I was like, oh, yeah, I was just at that Chick-fil-A last week and meeting somebody who lives here in this small town who literally spent her childhood in the same place I spent my childhood was ridiculous. And I was telling her about the kids and why we're moving to Texas and telling her about you. And she's like, you don't look old enough to have a 24-year-old. I'm like, thank you. I'll be like 48 in, 3 weeks. It's fine. It's actually 4 or 5 weeks, whatever. I think that's how old I'm going to be. I actually can't ever remember. But yeah, that was today.
That is pretty interesting that you say, it only took you about 35 seconds to get over the fact that, this thing, which is ironic, right? Because this is this thing that you literally scheduled in order to conversate with people, right? And then like when people haven't, like the trend is that people haven't shown up before. Mm-hmm. And so now when somebody shows up, you're like, I'm kind of pissed off about this in the most backwards way possible, right? But I think it comes down to like you doing what you did, which is like, where's the blessing in this so-called burden, right? Where is the thing that I'm missing here? Because like you said, it's not a coincidence that she showed up today and not week 1. And I have a similar thought whenever like Kaysen is interrupting my workout, right? Like I'm in the moment, sometimes it feels like I have to, right? It's like, man, I'm having to watch my son while I work out, right? No, it's like actually you get to raise your son and be the example to him by showing him, what living a health and fitness lifestyle is, right? So I think about that when things don't go as planned. It comes down to, okay, well, first of all, this was something that I created in my head. This plan was supposed to go, step 1, 2, and 3. And really, that's not the way that it's supposed to go is the way that it goes. And as the saying that I grew up with is you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. That's like it is what it is. So you might as well look at it as where is the benefit in this situation, not holding on to the fact that you didn't get to, do what you wanted to do, right? In the timeliness that you wanted to do it and all that kind of stuff, right? Because what you did was you pivoted quickly, texted me and was like, hey, I didn't get to do my normal training time. So what is it that I can do, in my garage? I sent you something to do that would take, minimal amounts of time, minimal equipment, not a whole lot of like prep work to be able to do it, right? That type of stuff. So not only did you get to experience this life-changing probably difference for this woman who is 71 years old, with whatever life she has left, whether it's one day or, 1,000 days, right? That she like finally felt that she could take a breath. And the thing that we all teach all kids is like, take a big breath, a deep breath before if you feel yourself getting angry. And here she is, we teach that to a 1-year-old. Here she is 71 years old. And for the first time, the light bulb went off of like, holy crap, this is actually what it feels like to take a breath. So
it was so phenomenal to watch, because she's like, whenever I had her holding a pose, she's like, I've been here 4 breaths. And I said, I know. I'm actually waiting for your body to release. She's like, can you see that? And I said, oh, yeah. She's like, did my body do it? Oh, no. No, it did not. No, it did not. I didn't take my practice. But it started to get me thinking of really my heart in everything that you and I do, whether people are listening to this podcast or every client of ours or everybody who hears us speak publicly, that I always want people to feel better when they leave than when they walked in. If I gave them just a little bit of something that they leave going, whether there's less weight on my shoulders, or I have a little bit more hope, or I have a little bit perspective, is if whoever gets to encounter with us together or individually, that experience leaves them more fulfilled to step back into the world than when they walked in. And so today that was 100% the case. And I can't wait to see what happens. And to add on to it, and you touched it a little bit, is that I did ask you, what could I do today? And I haven't gotten to play like that since we've moved into this ketogenic state. And so I was really curious to be like, and I said, Justin, put the guardrails on, which is why I didn't just pick something by myself. So you guys know that I could have picked my own training thing today. I'm qualified to be like, this is my training session today, but I'm always going to divert to Justin, because left to my own devices, I will go harder and longer than I should. And so I'm always going to defer to him and be like, hey, put the guardrails on. How far can we press this? And I was curious to what you were going to hand back to me. And I'm loving what you gave me. And actually, when we're done recording is when I'm going to go knock that out and test this, because I'm super excited and thankful that I get to, which would not have happened if she would not have shown up to yoga. We wouldn't have gotten to test this. I wouldn't have asked you for anything, and I wouldn't have gotten to play with anything that I get to play with this afternoon.
Yeah, so potential, rocking your day, rocking your shoe type of moment, an inconvenience and something that can make you pissed off has actually ended up being the water, the ripple effect was a bunch of positive things, right?
So many things.
When we were talking earlier today about, hey, what do we want to, just bring up and go forward with when we talk on the podcast, is that same ripple effect, or that same downstream kind of waterfall effect, if you will, of how stress can impact you in multiple different ways. But the thing we tend to focus on with everybody that we work with is, how it impacts the way that you think about yourself and the way that your body shows up in the world, like the symptoms that you have. And this is pretty fresh on our minds because we just taught about this same subject in the cohort last night. But I thought it was worthy of trying to describe to everybody, and so that we could understand it better ourselves. I mean, every conversation that we have is us teaching each other in some way, shape, or form, right? Mm-hmm. Teaching ourselves through teaching each other, because that's where the retaining of the information comes in. Is this cross section of the story that's circulating in our head, the cross section of how we have thought about ourselves up to this point in our life, whether it's due to what's always going to be due to past experiences. There's no getting around that, right? You are who you are because of what you've been through now, up to now. right? I mean, that is the only thing that you can be. There's no just like popping out of thin air. And the intersection of that story in your head and the physical manifestations, which I don't really, not crazy about that word, but the physical things that you
Implications?
see.
Do you want to?
Yeah,
You can
the
go with
physical implications. Yeah.
Implications.
Health metrics, if you will, that you see now and how those things actually have a cross section. That's where me and you really live in our career, but also in our day to day, right? We can't not see it when we hear somebody talk and when we see symptoms that people have. And it's like a mystery to a lot of people, but to us, it's, yeah, no wonder you're like the way that you are. And even to ourselves, right? Like me and you just had this conversation about you is like, hey, there's certain things that I'm still trying to work through and will probably always be my first gut instinct because it is a conditioning that I have. But that doesn't mean that it has to be my factory default, right? Or does it have to mean that I can't override that default and get into a better mode of operation? So on that note, where do you come in as far as that, or where do you live in your head as far as that cross section between what stress can cost you on a mental and a physical level?
You want me to go me personally first?
Yeah,
like how would it cost
personal
me?
Personal experience is going to be the best illustration right now.
Well, stress really costs me. It's really expensive for me. And right now, I mean, this was literally our conversation 30 minutes ago. So to bring you guys all up to speed on conversations that Justin and I were just having, is that we have me in a ketogenic state to kind of repair this weight loss resistance that I have, which is a stress response of 15 years of not having the opportunity or skill set fully and of managing inbound stressors. And we can get into that on a different podcast of foster care, failed adoption, trauma, secondary trauma, all of that, to where our family has only been truthfully safe, physically safe, for 6 years. And we still have a son living with autism and PTSD. So my nervous system doesn't fully get to be as baseline as everybody else's, just because that we are safe. We are still dealing with children who came from a traumatic situation, and that trauma still lives in their bodies and affects ours. So as we have me in this ketogenic state, the thing, and I literally said this to you, that I'm best at, we can't utilize right now, because in this state, I don't have as much clarity and function of the things that I'm amazing at. And I would love for you to really share from your perspective, your response back to me when I said that, because I think it's not only a true testament to our coaching relationship, but our friendship, because you were really tender about it. Because I was like, hey, you're going to need to give me a lot of grace, especially as we're in this heavy growing process of our business. Like, we're at this pinnacle that very quickly here, everything changes and we're never going to be able to go back, because this is special right now, that I'm not as confident in all of my abilities because I'm not clear. And how did you shift my perspective?
So, the essence, like you said, of what you were trying to get across was like, hey, I need you to, and I was still a little bit, even now, confused on what you were trying to say. Like, do you want me to call out the fact that you're falling short of your normal? Like, is that what you want me to do? You're like, I need you to tell me. I'm like, why would I tell you? I'm just going to go cover your 6 and we're going to be good. Right. And we'll come, it will be reciprocated at some point in time. I have no doubt. And so you were like, I need you to like, tell me when I'm not, up to snuff. I don't know what you were trying to say. Anyway, you're basically saying there are times in this process of us going through these dietary changes, like being in a ketogenic state, so that you can overcome the weight loss resistance and see this progress that you haven't seen in years. You're normal. Your internal narrative is, I get things done. And kind of no matter the cost.
100%.
Personally, right? You will save
100%.
everybody else's feelings and situations at the sacrifice of your own, in some way, shape, or form. And I mean, everybody in your immediate circle, right? You'll take care of your kids, you'll take care of your husband, you'll take care of your clients and all that kind of stuff before taking care of yourself, which is not an altogether bad thing because you're a selfless individual. But the perspective that I brought was because you were being so down about the possibility, because you were writing a story before it's even like, you don't know, you're just basing it off of some past experience, but comparing to a baseline of being more stressed out and using that stress as productive, like using that towards productive energy, but at what cost on the back end. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, wait a minute, let's look at this a different way. Would you rather be stressed out and just like pushing the redlining to push productivity to get something done maybe faster, maybe a little bit faster, or at the expense of being worn out and heavy recovery mode on the back end? Or would you rather be able to go with some slow productivity and be able to move strategically, precisely, consistently along the way, so that when you get to where you're at, you're like, okay, that was challenging, but I'm not completely down and out. I'm not completely worn out. And now I have this reserve of energy to take a step back, refocus, and keep chipping away at it. And so that was my perspective to you, is like, wait a minute, you're already saying that when we get back into, because you're going through a refeed this coming weekend, you're going to get back into keto. It's like, wait, you're already telling me that you're going to be expected to be less capacity. Well, what if we just took that capacity situation and flipped it on its head and goes, no, this is what I'm going to get done and nothing more. Everything else can wait. Because not only is that an exercise in understanding how to manage your energy, no matter the situation, but it's also an exercise in prioritization. Because when you can't do everything, you really start to figure out what needs to be done, right?
I love how you worded that. So I'm also going to clarify what I want from you, because I'm so good at not letting people see what's actually going on. It was the ask of, hey, I see you. Not that you're calling out like, hey, your shortcomings, but like, hey, I see you and I've got your 6. Because for most people in relationships with me, well, first of all, like, nobody else is this close other than my husband, and we're living with lives going the same direction very, very quickly, right? So really outside the context of like our friendship and business relationship, nobody really gets to see that piece of me. And so for what I'm asking is like, hey, yeah, I see you. I see you. And I've got your 6. And at some point it absolutely will be reciprocal. It's just that vulnerability being like, hey, I'm not going to pretend that you don't know. So I want you to tell me that I know that you already know. So we just have it abundantly known. So what does it cost me? I'm not willing to pay any more. Because how we got here wasn't just 15 years. If we're going to make this really a lot clearer, this was last year when I was growing my business, my coaching business independently. And I think we talked about in the last podcast of the ideology of fat versus the identity of fat, where we saw my fat loss stall was when I can override and execute all day long because I had to in the situation we were in with our children. I didn't have an opportunity because safety was on the line to do anything different. So I am not conditioned for chaos. Like, you throw me in chaos and I will execute all day long. But the cost we are now repairing. I'm no longer willing to pay that price physically in my body, which is why we are repairing the systems when we talk specifically about stress and inflammation. And these are also the clients we work with. But we went, hey, let's take this in me first. and then take it more out into the masses. So I can speak to it firsthand that you could do everything right, but if you are not managing your inbound stressors, it is going to lead to inflammation, which is going to lead to physiological responses that are going to frustrate you, whether emotionally or physically, or how you move or how you think or decisions you make. So when we're looking at something really important to me right now, like growing our business and being able to serve all the people that we're entrusted to coach, that I could very easily go to my, is it modus operandi? Is that the right word? Like my baseline thing of like override and execute. So I have to choose to be different because that's the thing I did the longest. And though it worked, and it does work, that doesn't mean it's sustainable. So I'm trading off productivity and execution for long-term sustainability and repairing the systems of my body.
Absolutely. I think it's a perfect example, excuse me, a perfect example of the, just because you can doesn't mean you should situation. And what it reminds me of is you're kind of burning dirty fuel, really, in that you have fuel to fuel the process, but the fuel is stress. The fuel is ultimately detrimental internally, although it produces some outcomes. Because like you said, you conditioned yourself to handle chaos. You conditioned yourself to be the rock in the middle of the storm. But being the rock is very expensive. It's very, right? It costs you a lot to do that. And you can't do that time and time again. I mean, you're just not going to end up being like the rock is going to deteriorate over time if it continues to get exposed to storms. And so just because you can flip that switch and go into override and execute, there's a cost associated. There's a trade-off associated with everything. It's just like when you're trying to get lean. There's always a trade-off to getting the next level of leanness, right? So you may not be overweight, but you may want to be like, man, I want to be absolutely shredded. Okay. There's a trade-off that you might not be willing to make to get there. And you may be like, actually, kind of happy if that's what I have to do to get there, kind of happy with where I am, right? Not because you're scared to get there, but because, hey, it doesn't mean enough to me to trade off these things. And that's okay. That's actually a very mature decision to make. And so when we think about how expensive stress really is, people don't see that on the front end. And that's exactly why we do what we do, is to expose you and make you aware of what is going on in your mode of operation, what may be hurting you. It's getting externally good metrics in terms of work done or what the world sees, but what you actually feel and experience on the inside, and this could be in your head or actually, physiologically health metrics, that's actually deteriorating. And I said this to a client of ours who has most of our clients have this same type of situation, but a client of ours who's really, really good at turning his brain on and getting academic focused work done in a short time frame. I mean, we're talking about a guy who can who could probably write a thesis in the course of a week. And it would be standard. It would be a exceptional product, right? It would not be a suboptimal product. And so because he's so used to that, you and I had to go into it and say, okay, you can. And the way that I put it to him is, but you get older every time you do.
Okay, let that hit, because there's so much truth to that. Like it costs more than you think. And when you said that to him, I'm remembering it as you are playing the story back right now, but it's so true. And I think if people really understood, and maybe we can do a better job explaining it today before we finish the story, that this is costing you more than you ever want to pay. This isn't 24% interest on a credit card. but for something that you wanted. This is so much more than that you can't get back. You can repair it to the best of your ability, but it's almost like, did you ever see the movie The Princess Bride?
Probably at one point in my life, but I do not always remember the specifics.
Okay, remember where you were in the story. There's the scene where, you know, the prince is hooked up to this machine and they're like, we just stole 10 years off of your life. How does that feel? I'll find the clip and I'll send it to you. And he just like groans like, you know, like and stresses like that. Like, I just stole this much time off of your life. You know, how does that feel? But when you're in it, you don't even know that you're in it. So going back to our client, when you told him that, like, it hit really hard. How did we then support him through it?
Right. So when he understood it to be like that, being like, oh, it's actually chipping away years off my timeline, my life's timeline, right? It's actually pulling that, it's making that shorter. We were like, okay, so just because you can doesn't mean you should. So how do we actually start to walk down a little bit of a different path here? How do we use what you already know how to do, which is very high level executive function, smartest dude I've ever met, and say, where do you start to slow down? Ultimately, that was the question. That was the essence of the question. And so what we ultimately did was, well, how do you chunk this up into pieces that are manageable for you and make this to where you're actually hungry to come back and do it again? So it was a purposeful, self-limiting behavior is what we did. It's what I call it anyway. I likened it to going in the gym, but no more than 10 minutes. If I told anybody who's listening to this podcast to say, hey, I know you're starting a gym habit. Guess what? Tomorrow, I want you to go in there. I want you to set your watch or your timer for 10 minutes. And when that 10 minutes goes, I want you to leave. And your first thought is, that's not even going to get me through a warm up. Exactly. But guess what? Your problem is not getting through a warm up. Your problem is coming back to the gym more than 1 week, 2 weeks in a row. So what am I going to do? I'm actually going to starve you of what the dopamine that you're looking for, that strong hit of a 30, 45, 60 minute session done at whatever intensity, and go, hey, I only want you to stay in there for this time, leave, because guess what? That makes you want to go back again tomorrow. It makes you more hungry when you get less food. So what do we do for him? Same thing. How do we chunk this up to where not only is it manageable, because we know you can do it all at the same time if you wanted to. First of all, it's going to be a better product if you chunk it up, because you're going to be able to go back and look at what you made a mistake on potentially. But how do you actually manage this in a way that you're hungry to wake up the next day or whenever the interval is and go, okay, let's get the next piece done. And he actually sent us a message today and goes, I've had a huge breakthrough with how I schedule things out. And we knew that would happen because he's not a guy that just leaves things be. He goes and he tinkers with it. He experiments. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking or on the fence or considering about being a client of ours working with us, that's the person we want. We want someone who is willing to accept that they don't have the best process right now, and willing to accept that we might not have the best process for them, but they're open to the possibility of a different way. And together, when we put all of our brains together, we can go start here, start to tweak, and you will find the way that makes the most sense, because you will just be led to it. You'll kind of be drawn to it. If you start to think about it, anything you put your focus on, you're going to come out with a better outcome. So in a long story short, long story long fashion, it was, yep, we understand you can push that button at whatever time and you can flip that dark power on and you can get it done, right? It reminds me of like movies where like the villain is pulling some type of like dark energy out of some kind of stone or crystal or something like that. And he's like, it's the most power in the world, right? Like they're more powerful than the hero, but it's at a detriment to them internally, right? They're ultimately breaking themselves down because they're power hungry. That's kind of what it reminds me of. It's like, hey, you can really turn that stress on and go, hammer down, right? You can load yourself full of caffeine. You can, wipe everything else off your slate that I'm not going to say should, that would be important to you in different scenarios, right? Family, relationships, personal time, training, whatever it is, just to get this thing done. And you'll get it done. But then on the back end, you'll be like, man, I'm so worn out. I don't want to do anything for the next 2 days. And so there's a better way to do it.
I was thinking as you were telling that story, how much truth there is to that. Yes, you can do that. I'm the villain in some people's story. We know that to be true. Stay alone long enough and it naturally happens that way. But on the other side, that we have now kind of conditioned our clients to a spot where when they have long periods of stress and they realize the correlation to when they didn't handle their inbound stressors well, that they get sick. And at first, they didn't believe us. At first, because these are the patterns of just, hey, stress, inflammation, you're going to see an immune system response. You're going to see all these things show up, and not just, around the seasons. That's a different podcast for a different day. Add sugar and stress and see what happens to the whole population. Go down the rabbit hole for a second. But now when they come out of stressful situations, they're like, and I'm sick. And of course I am, because now they understand the correlation between if they would have done it different. And one of the best stories I have of that is, gosh, I think it was literally 6 years ago. Ted was off on some military thing, gone. We had just become safe as a family, and Isaiah had strep that turned into pneumonia, and they missed it. And so for a kid who can't feel pain, he really couldn't communicate how sick he was. And I was watching him get sicker and sicker and sicker. So I bring him to the ER. They give him a breathing treatment. His O2 drops to mid 70s. And I'm like, this is not good. And so they do an x-ray, and he had really water on his lungs, like significantly. And they're like, we are going to need to take him by ambulance to Children's Hospital. Okay. This is still Isaiah dissociating like 60 times a day. I am alone with 6 children, and they're going to take Isaiah to a hospital at 12 years old by himself. Ted is gone. He cannot help me. I didn't have a support system. So Isaiah's in the hospital actually living his best life, because they're giving him chocolate cake. They thought they were going to use antibiotics. They end up having to put a chest tube in him. And then the chest tube gets twisted. And they said, hey, we wouldn't let other parents in the ER. So this is how well I can handle crisis. I'm going to get to the point of the story. Like, we wouldn't let other parents into the OR when we are going to fish this tube out and undo the hook so the chest tube could still drain, but we're going to let you in. And of course, because I'm a superhero, why would I think anything different that you couldn't handle a live x-ray while there's a chest tube in your kid's freaking lung and nobody else is allowed in a place that I could get there? Well, that's not unbeknownst to me. I get to a lot of places that nobody else gets to go. Isaiah starts coughing up blood, and I just really calmly look at the staff, and I'm like, you're a children's hospital. You got blood here, right? They're like, yeah, we got blood here. They got it unhooked. It's all fine. Isaiah eventually gets to go home. It was a week later, when all was calm, I became the sickest with a respiratory infection that I had ever physically been. Like, to the point that I could not breathe. Now, I know all of this, right? And there's a difference between knowing all of this. If you're listening to this and you're like, oh, Stacey, like, I hear you. What you and Justin are saying, yeah, my stress response, I'm going to get sick. Somebody died, I got sick. I had all of these things, went through a divorce or whatever happened, and I got sick. I hear it. And even at the time, I was in it and couldn't get out of it. So when we talk about the cost of it, yeah, you can pull from the resources. You can be the superhero. And the most challenging pieces of it, from my personal experience, is that everybody, this is why Justin called me amazing at the beginning of the podcast, and I didn't say shit about it because he knows and he was just being playful, is that people would look at me and go, "You're amazing. You're a saint. You're a superhero," without knowing how much it actually cost me. And so in this conversation, I think that people look at, for lack of the better words, if you've not been a part of like kind of a trauma culture that talks about the difference between big T's and little t trauma, which is really explained super well in a book called The Body Keeps a Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Love him. Love him. Him and Peter Levine, if you want to know more about trauma, amazing authors and resources. People expect people with big T trauma, like some horrific life event, like our combat vets, or even people who have suffered abuse or plane crashes or car crashes, that pick something horrific, and you expect people with big T trauma to have some aftermath physiologically. Like, we expect to see that. I think the conversation that you and I wanted to bring to the table is the accumulation of all the little T's and how that impacts people. What would you like? I love how you explain it, so I'm going to hand it back to you.
So to re-illustrate the point, when you see people with this big T trauma, right? Trauma, that type of trauma.
Ooh, you went deep voice on that.
Yeah.
You roll your shoulder back and say it with your whole chest?
Yeah. when they got trauma, not trauma.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
When you see people with that and you hear stories about that, you can only imagine what they deal with now and what they're going to have to deal with later. And that makes a lot of sense to most people, right? They got an arm blown off in combat, and not only can they not operate with normal function of their limbs, but now they have to deal with all the stigma that comes with being an amputee and special assistance and, wiping their own, not to be able to wipe their own ass at the beginning, that type of stuff, right? I don't think people understand. This is why stories of combat vets hit so hard, because when they tell the details that people actually wouldn't think about, because you just don't imagine, you just hard to wrap your head around a world in which you don't have limbs, right? That is the actual things that, notwithstanding the actual things they saw in combat, but post hoc, right? Even if you didn't lose any limbs, what actually is going to, the signals that are sent from the brain. That's essentially what we're talking about here on like a underlying level. And that's a flood of signal. And they get a lot of help. They get a lot of resources. At least that's where the resources are directed at people with big T trauma generally, right? Mm-hmm. But then we have these little T traumas, which are something a parent or a relative said to you when you were younger that stuck in your head. And that's part of your internal narrative, right? Or your general physique all your life, your body image growing up, right? A failed relationship that really meant a lot to you, or multiple of those. Telling yourself that you're going to do something with your life or your body or a relationship, and you don't actually end up seeing that to come. You didn't keep a promise, maybe. The accumulation of all those little stories that make up part of what goes through your head on a daily basis. Because what we're talking about is the reliving. That's what trauma is. It's a relived constant experience. If your brain was able to forget it, like you got in a car crash and your brain didn't remember it after a week, then other than the physical damage from the car crash, you probably wouldn't see that much of a detriment, right? But it's because that internal memory doesn't forget things that stick like glue to the parts of your brain that remember that. And it becomes, at some point you forget even when it happened. It just becomes part of who you are. Oh, I've always thought I was fat, right? I've always thought I had a big nose. I always thought that, I was the slow kid on the playground because everybody else was faster than me and somebody called me a slowpoke, right? And I know that sounds like minuscule, but typically it's things that happen earlier in life, not later in life, right? So it's the accumulation of these little T traumas that start to weigh on you. And over time, that narrative in your head, you start to close yourself off to the possibility of change. That's what happens to the people that we coach. That's what happens to everybody to some degree that doesn't get the results they want. But you've closed yourself off to the possibility that there's a method or a strategy or a product or a principle or a practice that can get you farther down the road. And that's why you keep coming up short, because you grab the next shiny thing looking for some dopamine. It feels good for a little while. And then you're like, I knew this wouldn't work for me. I just thought I'd give it a shot, right? You go take the next weight loss drug, works for a little while. You're not able to afford it anymore, or some side effect kicks you out of it. And now you're back at square one or worse. And those things start to add up on you. And then you just go into fuck it mode, and you don't do anything. You can't, you don't feel like you can. You're in a dark place that it's like, well, this just wasn't meant for me. And so it's that circulating story in your head that is sending signals to your body that is actually showing up as insert symptom here. Skin conditions, autoimmunity, shitty digestion, no pun intended, stiffness, soreness, hair loss, menstrual problems. I mean, and I'm not saying that is the one overall cause of everything, but it's a large contributing factor if you could unravel it all and see it laid out in front of you on a piece of paper. And so if we can shift that internal narrative, actually, if we can slow it down and create a little bit of space in your head, just a little bit of space, slow it down, get you to say it, write it, do whatever. If you can slow it down, you can start to detach from it. And when you start to detach from it, then it doesn't become yours. It becomes something that just is, right? You still feel it, but it becomes a little bit more esoteric. It doesn't feel so personal. And so you start to shift from this is the way it is to that is something. I don't know that that's the way it is, but it is something. And then we can shift you even more into maybe it could be different, into maybe I ought to give this a try, into this seems like it's working. What else is there? And so now you become open to the possibility through these small shifts of whatever the tactic is, because every tactic works. Meditation works, breath work works, cold therapy works, going on a walk outside works, grounding works, tongue scraping works. I mean, like, pick a method, right? Everything's got some external validity to it. Otherwise, people wouldn't have recommended. Somebody's gotten some similar, like some good result. I'm not saying anything's worth trying. I'm just saying everything has a benefit at some point. But it's not the thing that failed you. It's your inability to drop your guard and allow that thing to affect you. That's how expensive stress is. And so if you're listening to this and you're going, man, I've never really given anything a chance, and I'm not sure that I can, let me put an image in your head. That's actually something I got from Ed Mylett. Great motivation, great speaker, great podcast. So go look Ed up if you don't know who that is. But he has a belief, and I do too, that at the end of our life, when we get to where we're going, and for me, that's going to be heaven, you're going to meet whoever that is, God, Peter, insert name here, right? And they're going to show you what you could have been. They're going to show you your potential. You're going to meet that person. This is what Justin could have been. This is what Stacy could have been had they lived up to their fullest potential. And my delusion is that that guy is going to be a direct reflection of who I am at that point. He's going to be my twin. He's not going to be some distant person that I don't even recognize. He's going to be exactly who I am in that moment because I lived up to the potential as close as I could to it, right? That's my delusion for myself. That's my hope. And so if you're thinking about what is stress actually costing me, it's actually costing you the ability to be who you were meant to be. Mm-hmm. And that gets tossed around a lot, who you were meant to be, reliving your fullest potential. I want you to wipe all the shit you know about that off the table for a second and just think about who you could be. And I'm going to go as far as say who you are meant to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 71 years old doing yoga with Stacy, right? Who you were meant to be at that point. That's what stress is actually costing you. It adds up over time. Little T's, right? Maybe a big T thrown in there, but there's little T's all over the place. And so if it's not important to you now, I don't know when it's going to be. So that's how I would challenge you to think about it.
It was really profound. I don't know that I want to even add anything to that. The resource that I have to give to people, if you are trying to delineate, do I have a big T or little t? Because if you've lived through really challenging circumstances, you can delude yourself to thinking that your big T trauma was a little t trauma because it was made normal.
Yeah.
I especially see that in a lot of circumstances of early childhood trauma, that because it was so frequent and accepted or whatever it was, that your dysfunctional normal stops feeling traumatic, which is really a survival mechanism. And so there is something called the ACE study, ACE. You can Google it and take it yourself. It's 10 questions. It actually, came out in the 80s. And it's 10 simple questions that you can answer. Now, based on your score on that ACE study, gives you the propensity to what physical ailments you are likely or could see in your lifetime based upon all the things that Justin and I talked about today. How stress impacts inflammation, which leads to diseases. This is not new information. We did not come up with this information. Studied in this information, made a whole professional career out of this information over here, and then added even more to it as we bring together and take a systemic approach to it. But if you're curious to be a little bit more based in what's real, cautiously, right? Because there are some questions on there that could be triggering as you start to reconnect with what reality was versus your perception of what it was, as to maybe an understanding of why you're seeing some of the physical struggles that you're sharing right now. I will say that everything we do isn't magic. It's systemic. And these are people coming to us, not because they don't have a therapist. Most of our clients have therapists. And I'm so glad they do.
Yeah, we recommend that. We recommend that heavily.
Heavily. But coming with a physical goal of wanting to look different. They have a physique goal. But their physique goal is actually wanting to feel something different in what they carry in their body. Not just how they carry their body, but what they carry in their body. And so this intersection is really what we do best. And it's a conversation that the reason we decided to do business together and make a business together was because the conversation wasn't happening enough. And it's a really underserved population. And we want to just be of service, that at some point you walk in every conversation with us or this podcast or live, or when you get to see us in person, and you have a little bit more hope, a little bit more opportunity, and you feel a little bit lighter from just every interaction you have with us.
Every day and twice on Sundays. So if you want to get a hold of us, right, the easiest way is to go to Instagram, look up our handles, those are in the description of this episode, and shoot us a message. You can also join our free school group Schools is the name of the platform, SKOOL, called the Fortify Health Coaching Group. The name of our business is Fortify Health Coaching. Surprise. And there's plenty of stuff in there. It costs you nothing to be in that group. There's plenty of stuff that we're going to have in there now and in the future in order to give you a little bit more depth to the conversation that we just had. Although I would argue that we just gave you an hour's worth of things that you could spend a lifetime thinking about. And so there's going to be more for you in there. And if you want to start a conversation that it's more than just, or if you want it to be between just one of us or all of us or whatever, that's cool. If you want a conversation that's going to be more of a community-wide impact and seeing other people's experiences, which I guarantee you're going to find somebody who's been through something similar, that's where you need to go. We also have our group offering, our group coaching offering, essentially is what it is, called the Cohort. And right now we're going through the first iteration of that. And as we continue to get better at what we do and continue to build out more and more information into those modules, the cohorts will get better. So we encourage you to sign up for that as well. There'll be plenty of information about that within the free group or on our Instagram, link in our Instagram bio. And then, of course, me and Stacy also do two-on-one coaching, where that's like the standard in my head. Dual coaching, where you get both of us as your coaches. We do weekly calls. We go in depth. And like Stacy said, with the ACE assessment that you can take online, we actually have our own set of assessments in which we ask people to fill out so that we can understand how do we best support you supplementally, nutritionally, emotionally, all that type of stuff. So we're going to put you through our process in order to get you where you want to go. And so that's our hope for you, is that you get where you want to go, no matter if it's listening to this podcast and you start to go down your own rabbit holes, you invest in something that we have or our free stuff or whatever it is, or you go pick up one of the books that Stacy recommended and you start to dive in that way. But regardless of what it is, if you like something, let us know what you liked so we can do more of that. And until then, we will see y'all next time.